They called her broken and useless. But one human changed her destiny. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile corridors of Genesis Research Station. Dr. Vincent Hayes pushed, his glasses up his nose as he reviewed the failed experiment. Reports. Another batch of genetically enhanced beings had been terminated. The corporation demanded perfection, and anything less was considered waste. In the deepest level of the facility, behind reinforced glass, sat Subject 47. The researchers called her Nyx, though she had never been given a proper name. Her appearance was striking yet disturbing to those who looked upon her. Standing barely 5 feet tall, her skin held an unusual silver-blue tint that shimmered under artificial light. Her eyes were completely black, like pools of starlight, and small crystalline formations grew along her temples and collarbone. "Another failure," muttered Dr. Rebecca Torres, the lead geneticist. She tapped her tablet screen, reviewing Nyx's test results. "Her cellular structure is unstable. The crystalline growths appear to be random. She shows no signs of the enhanced strength or intelligence we were trying to achieve." Vincent watched through the observation window as Nyx sat motionless in the ice corner of her containment cell. She had been created 3 years ago as part of Project Ascension, an attempt to engineer beings who could survive in harsh alien environments. The goal was to create scouts and workers for humanity's expansion into hostile worlds. But Nyx was different from the other subjects. Where they showed aggression or compliance, she showed nothing. She ate when food was provided, slept when lights dimmed, but never spoke or reacted to the researchers. The crystals on her body grew in unpredictable patterns, serving no apparent purpose. "The Borg wants her terminated tomorrow," Rebecca said, not looking up from her tablet. "She's taking up valuable space and resources. We need that cell for the next batch." Vincent felt something twist in his stomach. He had been watching Nyx for months, and while others saw a failed experiment, he noticed something different. The way she positioned herself near the small window, how she traced patterns in the condensation on the glass. The subtle way her crystalline formations seemed to pulse with a faint inner light when she was alone. "Maybe we're measuring the wrong things," Vincent said quietly. Rebecca finally looked at him. "What do you mean?" "We're looking for strength and intelligence, but what if her gift is something else entirely? What if the crystals serve a purpose we don't understand? Vincent, she's shown zero response to any of our tests. No enhanced abilities. No useful traits. She's a genetic dead end." That night, Vincent couldn't sleep. He returned to the lab and made his way to Nyx's cell. The facility was nearly empty, with only a skeleton crew monitoring the overnight systems. He approached the observation window and was surprised to see Nyx standing, her hand pressed against the glass. For the first time in 3 years, she was looking directly at him. Her black eyes seemed to see right through him, and the crystals along her temples pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. Vincent felt drawn to place his own hand against the glass, mirroring her position. The moment their hands aligned, separated only by the reinforced barrier, something extraordinary happened. Images flooded Vincent's mind. Not his own memories, but visions of distant worlds, alien landscapes, and creatures beyond imagination. He saw forests of crystal trees under purple skies, oceans that sang with harmonic frequencies, and cities built from living stone. Vincent stumbled backward, gasping. Nyx remained at the window, her expression unchanged, but the crystals on her body now glowed with steady, beautiful light. He understood. She wasn't broken or useless. She was a bridge, a living connection to worlds and possibilities that humanity had never imagined. The crystals weren't random growths. They were receivers, antennae that could pick up signals and energies from across the galaxy. The next morning, Vincent arrived early to find the termination order already in progress. Security guards were preparing to transfer Nix to the disposal chamber. "Stop," Vincent called out, his voice echoing in the corridor. "I'm taking responsibility for this subject." Rebecca emerged from her office, looking annoyed. "Vincent, we discussed this. The board's decision is final." "Then I quit," he said simply. "And I'm filing a formal complaint with the ethics committee. This being is sentient, possibly more intelligent than any of us realize. Terminating her would be murder." The guards hesitated, looking between Vincent and Rebecca. Corporate protocols were clear about ethics violations, even suspected ones. Vincent knew he had bought himself time, but not much. He had to find a way to save Nix, to show the world what she truly was. As he looked at her through the glass, she pressed her hand to the window again, and the crystals along her body pulsed once in what he could only interpret as gratitude. 3 days after Vincent's confrontation with the board, Genesis Research Station buzzed with tension. Corporate executives had arrived from Earth, their expensive suits and cold expressions making it clear that they were not pleased with the delay in Subject 47's termination. Vincent worked frantically in his quarters, analyzing the visions Nix had shared with him. He had documented everything, trying to translate the alien images into scientific data that might convince the board of her value. But he knew time was running out. Late that evening, an alarm began blaring throughout the station. Vincent rushed from his room to find chaos in the corridors. Emergency lights cast everything in red shadows as personnel ran toward the containment levels. "Hull breach in Section C," came the announcement over the intercom. "All non-essential personnel evacuate immediately." Vincent's blood ran cold. Section C housed the experimental subjects. He pushed through the panicking crowd, making his way toward Nix's cell. The corridors filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. When he reached the containment level, he found Rebecca standing before a massive hole torn through the station's outer wall. Several cells had been breached, their reinforced. Glass shattered, but somehow Nix's cell remained intact. "How is this possible?" Rebecca muttered, staring at her tablet. "The structural integrity readings show the damage should have reached her cell too." Vincent looked at Nix through her unbroken window. She stood calmly in the center of her cell, arms outstretched, and the crystals across her body blazed with intense light. Around her cell, the walls showed a faint shimmer, like heat waves in summer air. She was protecting herself, creating some kind of energy barrier. "Get the emergency containment team," Rebecca ordered a nearby technician. "We need to transfer her before the hull breach spreads." But Vincent had a different idea. In the chaos of the evacuation, with half the station's systems offline, this might be his only chance. He activated his security override, something he had never used in his 15 years at the facility. The door to Nix's cell hissed open. She stepped out slowly, her bare feet silent on the metal floor. For the first time, Vincent saw her outside of captivity. She was smaller than he had expected, more fragile-looking, but the power radiating from her crystalline formations made the air around her thrum with energy. "Nix," he said softly, extending his hand to her. "Do you trust me?" She tilted her head, studying him with those endless black eyes. Then, to his amazement, she reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, he felt a warmth spread through him, and her crystals pulsed in what he had learned was her version of a smile. "Dr. Hayes." Rebecca's voice cut through the moment. She stood at the end of the corridor with 2 security guards, their weapons drawn. "Step away from the subject immediately." Vincent felt Nix's grip tighten on his hand. Through their connection, he sensed her fear and determination. She had been caged for 3 years, subjected to countless tests and procedures. She would not go back willingly. "She's not a subject, Rebecca," Vincent said, positioning himself between Nix and the guards. "She's a person, a living being with thoughts and feelings. "She's corporate property," Rebecca replied coldly. "And you're committing theft." The guards advanced, but as they did, something remarkable happened. The crystals on Nix's body began to resonate, creating a harmonic frequency that made the metal walls of the station vibrate. The lights flickered, and several of the electronic systems began to spark and fail. "She's interfering with our equipment," one of the guards said, lowering his weapon. "I can't get a lock on my targeting system." Vincent realized what was happening. Nix wasn't just receiving signals from across the galaxy. She could transmit them too. She was broadcasting on frequencies that disrupted the station's electronics. "The shuttle bay," Vincent whispered to her. "Can you get us to the shuttle bay?" Nix closed her eyes and extended her free hand. Vincent felt the harmonic vibrations intensify, and suddenly, every electronic lock in the corridor began to open. Emergency doors slid apart, creating a clear path toward the shuttle bay. They ran together through the station, with Nix's abilities clearing the way before them. Behind them, Vincent could hear Rebecca shouting orders and the sound of pursuit. But every time the security forces got close, their equipment would malfunction, their communications would cut out, or blast doors would seal shut between them. When they reached the shuttle bay, Vincent was amazed to find that one of the emergency pods was already powered up and ready for launch. Nix had somehow activated it remotely through her connection to the station's systems dot. As they climbed into the pod, Vincent felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. He was throwing away his career, his life's work, everything he had built. But as he looked at Nix, saw the wonder in her eyes as she experienced freedom for the first time, he knew he had made the right choice. The pod launched into space, carrying them away from Genesis Research Station and toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in years, Vincent felt truly alive. He had saved someone who the world had deemed worthless, and in doing so, had discovered something infinitely precious. The emergency pod drifted through space for 6 hours before Vincent managed to establish contact with a passing cargo vessel. Captain Maria Santos, a gruff woman in her 50s, who ran supplies to Outer Rim colonies, agreed to pick them up for a substantial fee that would drain Vincent's savings. "You're either very brave or very stupid," Maria said as she helped them aboard her ship, the Wandering Star. Her crew, a mix of humans and friendly alien species, watched curiously as Nix stepped onto the cargo deck. Nix's crystals had dimmed during their escape, but they still caught the light in fascinating ways. She stayed close to Vincent, clearly overwhelmed by her first experience outside the sterile walls of the research station. "Maybe both," Vincent admitted, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "But I couldn't let them destroy her." Maria studied Nix with the practical eye of someone who had seen many strange things in her years traveling the galaxy. "What is she exactly? Some kind of enhanced human?" "We're not sure," Vincent said honestly. "The corporation was trying to create beings who could survive in alien environments. But Nix is something more than they intended." Over the next few days, as they traveled toward the outer colonies, Vincent began to understand just how much more. Nix was fascinated by everything on the ship. She would stand for hours at the observation deck, watching the stars pass by. But it was her interaction with the ship's alien crew members that truly amazed Vincent. Kef, a blue-skinned Andromedan engineer, had been working on a complex engine problem for weeks. The ship's translation systems had been glitching, making communication difficult between species. But when Nix approached him, something extraordinary happened. The crystals on her temples began to pulse, in rhythm with Kef's natural bioluminescence. Suddenly, they could understand each other perfectly, not through words, but through a deeper form of communication that transcended language barriers. "How?" Vincent asked, watching in wonder as Nix and Kef worked together to repair the engine. "Captain, Santos stood beside him, equally amazed. "I've been running mixed-species crews for 15 years, she said. "I've never seen anything like this." She's not just communicating with him. She's connecting with him on some fundamental level. As word spread through the ship, other crew members began approaching Nyx. Each interaction revealed new aspects of her abilities. She could sense the emotional states of different species, could translate not just languages, but entire ways of thinking and perceiving the universe. Zara, a young crystalline being from the Vega system, was particularly drawn to Nyx. Her species communicated primarily through harmonic frequencies, something that had always isolated her from the rest of the crew. But Nyx's crystals could resonate with Zara's natural frequencies, creating a bridge between them. The Free Zones lived up to their reputation. The Wandering Star docked at Haven Station, a ramshackle collection of salvaged ships and asteroid mining platforms held together by desperation and stubborn independence. The air recycling systems wheezed, the artificial gravity fluctuated, and the population was a mix of refugees, criminals, and dreamers who had nowhere else to go. Captain Santos gathered her crew in the cargo bay before they disembarked. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice serious. "Out here, there's no law except what people make for themselves. Some communities are decent, others will rob you blind. Keep your wits about you." Vincent felt nervous as they prepared to leave. The ship, on the research station, he had been respected, important. Here, he was just another refugee with no money, no connections, and a companion that most would see as a dangerous freak. But Nyx seemed strangely calm. As they walked through Haven Station's crowded corridors, her crystals pulsed with soft light, and Vincent noticed something remarkable. People were staring at her, yes, but not with fear or disgust. They looked curious, even drawn to her. "There's something different about the atmosphere here," Vincent murmured to Captain Santos. "People out here have seen all kinds of strange things," she replied. "They're more accepting of differences. When you're living on the edge of survival, you learn to judge people by their actions, not their appearance." They found temporary accommodations in a converted cargo container that served as a boarding house. The manager, a grizzled former corporate executive named Jonas Webb, barely glanced at Nyx before quoting them a daily rate. "First week in advance," he said simply. "No questions asked, no paperwork required. That's the Haven way." Over the following days, Vincent and Nyx explored their new environment. Haven Station was rough around the edges, but it had something the corporate worlds lacked: genuine community. People looked out for each other because they had to. There was no government safety net, no corporate benefits, just neighbors helping. Neighbors Survive. Nyx was fascinated by everything. She would stand in the market areas, watching the interactions between dozens of different species. Traders from the Outer Rim mixed with refugees from corporate wars, creating a tapestry of cultures and languages that should have been impossible to navigate. But wherever Nyx went, communication somehow became easier. Disputes between traders would calm down when she approached. Language barriers would dissolve as her crystals resonated with the natural frequencies of different species. She wasn't trying to mediate, she was simply being herself, and that seemed to be enough. Word of the strange woman with the healing presence spread quickly through the station. People began seeking her out, bringing problems that couldn't be solved with money or force. A Rigelian family whose child had been traumatized by the war and wouldn't speak. 2 trading partners whose different cultural backgrounds had led to misunderstandings that threatened their business. Vincent watched in amazement as Nyx helped each person who came to her. She didn't offer advice or try to solve their problems directly. Instead, she created space for understanding, for connection, for the kind of deep communication that transcended words. "She's becoming something of a local legend," Jonas told. Vincent one evening as they sat in the station's makeshift cantina. People are calling her the Bridge Walker. They say she can help anyone understand anyone else. But their peaceful existence was shattered when a Genesis security ship arrived at Haven Station. Vincent's heart raced as he watched the sleek corporate vessel dock with the station's main port. They had been found. "We need to leave," he told Nix urgently. "The corporation has tracked us here." But Nix shook her head. Through their connection, Vincent felt her resolve. She was tired of running, tired of hiding. She had found a place where she could be useful, where she could help people. She wouldn't abandon that easily. The Genesis security team, led by cold-eyed woman named Director Walsh, began conducting searches throughout the station. They had legal authority to inspect any vessel or facility, but Haven Station's residents had their own ideas about corporate authority. "Funny thing about the environmental controls," Jonas mentioned casually, as the security team prepared to search the boarding house. "They've been acting up lately. Lots of system failures, especially in the sections where corporate types are trying to work." Vincent realized what was happening. The people of Haven Station were protecting them, using their knowledge of the station's aging systems to make life difficult for the corporate agents. But it was only a matter of time before their hiding place was discovered. That night, as Vincent lay awake worrying about their future, he felt Nix take his hand. Through their connection, she shared something with him. A vision of the galaxy, not as a collection of separate worlds and species, but as a living network of consciousness, connected by invisible threads of understanding and empathy. In her vision, he saw what she truly was. Not a failed experiment or a genetic anomaly, but a natural evolution of consciousness itself. She was what the galaxy was becoming, a bridge between the old ways of thinking and something entirely new. "You're not just special," Vincent whispered to her in the darkness. "You're the future." The next morning, Director Walsh's team finally tracked them down. But when they arrived at the boarding house, they found something unexpected. The entire population of Haven Station had gathered to protect Nix and Vincent. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all united in their determination to shield the woman who had brought them together. "Stand down," Director Walsh ordered, but her words carried no weight here. She had authority on corporate worlds. But Haven Station belonged to its people. And those people had found something worth protecting. The standoff at Haven Station lasted 3 days. Director Walsh and her Genesis security team found themselves surrounded by a population that refused to cooperate. Every time they tried to search a section of the station, they encountered system malfunctions that made their equipment useless. When they attempted to question residents, they faced polite but absolute silence. Vincent watched from the boarding house window as the corporate agents grew increasingly frustrated. They had expected to find 2 fugitives hiding in the shadows, not an entire community willing to stand against them. "This is unprecedented," Walsh said during a heated conversation with someone back at Genesis headquarters. Vincent could hear her through the thin walls. "The entire station population is harboring known criminals. We need authorization to use stronger measures, but stronger measures never came." The free zones existed in a delicate balance with the corporate worlds. Too much aggression could spark a wider conflict that would cost more than recovering one escaped experiment. On the 3rd night, Nix made a decision that changed everything. She walked calmly out of their hiding place and approached the Genesis security checkpoint. Vincent tried to follow her, but she placed a gentle hand on his chest, and through there connection, he understood. This was something she had to do alone. Director Walsh looked surprised when Nix presented herself. "Subject 47, she said coldly. "You're coming back to the laboratory where you belong." But Nix shook her head. For the first time since her escape, she spoke aloud, her voice clear and strong despite years of forced silence. "My name is Nix." She said simply, "And I don't belong to anyone." The crystals along her body began to pulse with gentle light, and something remarkable happened. Every communication device in the area, every computer system, every piece of electronic equipment began transmitting the same signal, not just on Haven Station, but throughout the sector and then beyond. It was Nix's story, broadcast in every language and frequency imaginable. The story of a being created to be a tool, who had instead become a bridge between worlds. The story of her 3 years in captivity, her escape, and her discovery of what she truly was. Vincent realized what she was doing. She wasn't just freeing herself. She was revealing the truth to the entire galaxy. Every person who received her transmission would understand what Genesis research had done, what they had tried to destroy. "Stop this immediately," Director Walsh demanded. But her equipment was as affected as everything else. The transmission continued, spreading like wildfire through the galactic communication networks. Within hours, the response began. Messages poured in from across the galaxy. Scientists who had been working on similar projects, appalled by what they learned. Colonies that offered sanctuary. Governments that promised protection for the being who had shown them new possibilities for interspecies cooperation. But the most powerful responses came from ordinary people. Families who had struggled with communication barriers. Communities divided by cultural differences. Species that had been isolated by the limitations of traditional translation methods. They all wanted to meet the bridge walker. They wanted to learn from her, to understand how she had accomplished what centuries of diplomacy had failed to achieve. Genesis Research Station found itself facing a public relations nightmare. Protesters gathered outside their facilities. Shareholders demanded answers. A board of directors called emergency meetings to discuss damage control. "We could fight this," Director Walsh told her superiors during a tense video conference. "But the public opinion is against us. She's become a symbol of something larger than just one experiment." The corporate response was swift and predictable. They disavowed any knowledge of unethical treatment, claimed that Nix had been a willing participant in their research, and offered to negotiate her return to voluntary studies. But Nix was no longer interested in their offers. She had found her purpose, and it wasn't in a laboratory cell. Haven Station became the first official embassy of interspecies understanding, with Nix as its unofficial ambassador. Beings from across the galaxy came to meet her, to experience the kind of deep communication she made possible. Vincent found his own new role as her chronicler, documenting the changes she brought to every community she touched. He watched as former enemies learned to understand each other, as trade disputes dissolved into partnerships, as the galaxy slowly began to see itself as a connected whole rather than isolated fragments. She was never broken, Vincent wrote in his final report, the one that would be read by billions across the galaxy. She was exactly what she was meant to be. We just didn't understand what that meant until we let her show us. Years later, when historians looked back on this period, they would mark it as the beginning of the Galactic Renaissance. A time when consciousness itself evolved, when the barriers between species began to dissolve, and when understanding became more important than conquest. And at the center of it all was a small figure with silver-blue skin and crystalline formations that caught the light like captured stars. The being they had called broken and useless, who had instead become the bridge to a better future. Nix never returned to Genesis Research Station. She had found something far more valuable than the safety of a laboratory cell. She had found her place in the galaxy, not as someone's creation or tool, but as herself, connecting worlds one conversation at a time. In the end, they had called her broken and useless. But one human had seen her true worth, and in doing so, had helped her change the destiny of every living being in the galaxy. The unwanted gift had become the most precious treasure of all, the key to understanding itself.